Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Let's Dev, where today we attempt to mash up two indie hits, PHASMOPHOBIA and MINIT. Now, I've yet to play PHASMOPHOBIA, but while watching the game in action, I was oddly reminded of MINIT's gameplay. In PHASMOPHOBIA, players must explore locations and complete objectives within those locations. These objectives are completed using items, most of which require multiple trips due to a restricted inventory system. And this is all done while a timer counts down to the player's impending death, which is almost exactly how I would describe MINIT's gameplay, bringing us to our project where we will attempt to put that observation to the test. So the plan will be to mash up the gameplay from PHASMOPHOBIA with MINIT. This will require we recreate and partly reimagine some aspects of each game to mesh them into a fast-paced ghost hunting adventure game. And we'll begin by first creating the basics for our game, which requires focusing on recreating some features from PHASMOPHOBIA in the 1-bit monochromatic style of MINIT. Sounds like a plan, one I'm really excited to get to, so let's start mashing. First up, let's go over what I've done before recording. I've already doodled up a bunch of visual content for our project, since visuals are pretty important to PHASMOPHOBIA's gameplay. I may also be really hopeful that this one works out. And by the way, the whole 1-bit monochrome thing we've got going on with recent projects is a complete coincidence, I promise. Anyway, the level itself is randomly generated using the same system featured in past projects, with some specifics tailored to the purposes of this mashup. For example, the furthest northern room is always the building's entry point, which is also where the player will always spawn. And ignore the bar for now, it's just leftover testing I did for the inevitable death timer. Now, I know what you're thinking, this is a lot on the eyes and is in no way spooky like a PHASMOPHOBIA environment. And I agree, so let's add some darkness. In the darkness controller, I added the darkness surface to our game. Haven't done this in a while, so it took some time to remember how to properly set up a surface. Now, one feature I really liked from MINIT was the lighting used in the dark areas. I can't ever remember seeing that effect used before, and outside of using a shader, there was only one way I could think to recreate it. I'd use one of the many light source sprites created for this project to follow the player on an 8x8 grid. And boy oh boy, what a difference some extreme darkness can make. With such a limited view, the same layouts we passed through without the darkness now seem so much larger and daunting with the added darkness. And since we're already working on lighting, we needed to add every ghost hunter's best friend, the flashlight. So back in the code, I had a flashlight source sprite point in the direction of the mouse's position. Testing showed that now, along with the glow around the player, was a nice beam of light that furthered the player's visibility. And unfortunately, the light can go through the walls and closed doors, but I'm not exactly sure how I'd fix that outside of a lot of extra math. And given the already limited visibility, it didn't seem worth the extra effort of figuring out. So I decided to move on. Up next was the inventory system. A DS list would be used for versatility purposes. I wanted to be able to cycle through the inventory, and so a button check for said cycling was made. Since the inventory is limited to only 3 spaces, all it take was to duplicate the data stored in the list's first entry and then delete that first entry. As a result, all the list entries would be moved up, giving us the illusion of a cycle effect. Then, to reflect the inventory cycle, each data entry was hard-coded into the UI, meaning the first entry in the tool's DS list, which is our active item, will always be displayed in the large area, and the remaining 2 items in our inventory will always be displayed as smaller icons to its right. So with item cycling now working, it was time to focus on some item usage. First up was checking for a flashlight to create the flashlight source. So the DS list data was updated to not only record item type, but whether that item is on or off. I then drew this data to the screen to make sure everything was working properly, which showed me that yes, it was working, and I was also accidentally generating my inventory 3 times. Oops. However, now that our items had states, we could check for flashlight lights. So in another button check to turn the flashlight on and off, I created a new function to check for flashlights in the player inventory. And if one is found and a flashlight is the current active item, the light boolean is toggled. This then draws the flashlight source to the surface. And the results were perfect, doing exactly as expected. So back to the code, I added the quote-unquote quicker way to toggle flashlights by doing a similar check, and as long as the flashlight is in the player's inventory, the light boolean would be toggled. Once again, this worked exactly as expected. The flashlight could be toggled on and off either with the spacebar as an active item, or T as long as the flashlight is in the player's possession. But to truly test this, we needed to get rid of the flashlight, so it was back to the code. Another key check for dropping items was made. In the event a tool object would be created, inheriting data for that tool from the tool list. That entry in the tool list was then reset to 0, which is the quote-unquote empty state for our inventory. Testing showed this worked well, a little too well, since we were able to drop quote-unquote empty items. That little error was fixed, and then it was on to a new button check. This time, in order to pick up items, we'd have the player keep track of the nearest tool object to their position. And if within grabbing distance of said item, it would be re-added to the list via the data stored in the object. That tool object is then deleted. My original approach was to basically do a reverse of the inventory cycling system, then I realized how much I was overthinking it. Instead, I'd iterate through the list, find the first empty entry in said list, and apply the data to that entry. This worked out perfectly, with items now being able to be dropped and picked up with their respective button presses. And on top of that, thanks to the light check, dropped flashlights also disable the light source from appearing and is automatically redrawn once a flashlight is picked up. And there we had it, our first steps into this weird little mashup. Honestly, this was a lot of fun and a great break from the insanity of recent projects. I've actually been wanting to do this one for like over a month now. Anyway, I feel like there is a ton of potential with this mashup, and one I'm very excited to continue working on, though I expect not everything will be as smooth sailing moving forward. But so far, I am happy with how well Phasmophobia and Minit are meshing, so fingers crossed that we'll be able to see this one through. But for now, that brings us to the end of today's episode of Let's Dev. So leave a like if you enjoyed the episode, subscribe and turn on notifications if you haven't already, and leave your thoughts on this mashup in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.